Hello and welcome to the Project Management Fundamentals webinar. In today's webinar, we are going to talk about one of the important knowledge areas within the Project Management's Book of Knowledge, which is PMBOK 6th edition. And that knowledge area is nothing but project schedule management. So I welcome you all to this webinar and thank you for signing on the webinar today. We are going to talk about some of the important topics associated with project schedule management. In fact, one of the important change that the PMI has done as a part of the PMBOK 6th edition was we now call it as schedule management and not just the time management. So it's important for us to understand why schedule management and what are some of the important processes within this knowledge area that we need to understand, not only just from exam point of view, but also from the implementation from this project schedule management point of view. So today's webinar is basically a very high level overview on project schedule management. We will be talking about the project schedule, the various processes within that, and how to manage the project schedule effectively. So let's get started with the project schedule management webinar. Now, as you all know, project schedule is very, very important, especially from the point of view of the project manager, because project manager is ultimately responsible for ensuring that the project is delivered within the schedule. And hence, as I mentioned earlier, that the schedule management is one of the most important knowledge areas that we have within the 10 knowledge areas that we talk about. So apart from the other knowledge areas that we cover as a part of the project management trainings, like risk management, or for that matter, stakeholder management, resource management, etc., one of the important one is definitely the project schedule management. In this webinar today, what we will talk about is basically within the schedule management, what are some of the important tools and the techniques that we can use in order to manage the schedule effectively, in order to derive and develop the schedule of the project effectively. So we will take a look at those skills, tools and techniques that are required. And apart from that, we will also look into the monitoring and controlling aspects of the project. Because as I mentioned that once we get started with the project activities, it's very, very important for us to ensure that we control and manage those activities effectively in order to deliver the project within the agreed schedule. We will definitely talk about how to do the monitoring and controlling of the scheduling activities. Not only that, we will also understand the importance of timely completion of the project. And in order to achieve that, how we can approach the schedule management activities in an organized manner so that we will have a better control over the schedule that we have derived. So we are going to actually go through all the processes within the schedule management at a high level. And feel free to ask if you have any questions during this webinar. So let's get started with the high level overview of the schedule management. So talking about the project schedule, now it's important for us to understand a few aspects around the schedule management. First is, of course, the scheduling methods. There are various scheduling methods that we use. Now, when we talk about scheduling, as you know, that we approach the project scheduling in a very systematic manner when we refer to the PMBOK while working on the projects. Because PMBOK has prescribed and has given the various guidelines and has given various principles for doing the effective schedule management. There are certain scheduling methods which are also being given to us and they are available to us, which we can refer to while working and deriving the project schedule. So project information will definitely is going to be one of the important factors while deriving the project schedule, because that's going to be the input for us when we arrive at the project schedule. So if you look at this information, whatever you see on the slide like this, the project information is input based on which we can derive the schedule using the scheduling tools and with the right set of skills that you possess as a project manager or as a part of the project that you're working on, then you will be able to derive the project schedule effectively. So there are these aspects, there are these components when we work on the schedule management. We need to have enough information about the activities, about the phases, about the milestones, about the project background, context, etc. And then once we have that, we can apply the right scheduling tools, which we are going to talk about very soon. And there are certain scheduling methods which we can use as well in order to approach the deriving of the schedule in a very, very organized manner. So that's how it typically happens on the project. What we get at the end is basically the plan. So when we actually begin working on the schedule management activities, one of the important part is coming up with the schedule model. So that's where we essentially capture the various dates of the key milestones of the key activities, and we come up with a schedule model which can be then tracked across the project life cycle. So all these things are very, very important from schedule management point of view. And if these things are in place, then you will be able to effectively manage the schedule of the project. So let's just talk about the tailoring aspect of the schedule management. Now, if you see the PMBOK 6th edition, it definitely focuses more on the tailoring aspect of the process. And that's definitely very important. As a consultant, when we go to the organizations and when we try to work with those teams, one of the important responsibility that we have is how we can tailor the existing process in order to make it more effective, in order to make it in such a way, tailor it in such a way that the project teams can find it very easy to implement. So some of the tailoring aspects we will talk about. So when we talk about the scheduling process particularly, one of the factor we need to take into consideration is the life cycle approach. So there are various life cycles of the project that we talk about. It could be adaptive life cycle, predictive life cycle, or hybrid life cycles, or we have the iterative and incremental life cycle. So which project life cycle typically you are going to adopt to, or you're going to basically apply, or which is that approach of the or for the project life cycle have you really chosen or have you agreed as a team? So that's one of the important inputs which needs to be considered. Availability of the resources will actually help us in tailoring the process, especially with respect to the schedule, because we need to have the resource calendar in place. We need to do the resource smoothing activities. We also need to do the resource leveling activities. So for that all, we need to know what is the resource availability. Technology support also has an important role to play. So if you have a better technology in place, then obviously while doing the estimation of the activities, you would factor that in. So if you're working on an IT project, for example, and if you have the right set of automation tools in place, if you have a continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline in place, then obviously that will make that much easier doing those activities with respect to release management or with respect to deployment of the software package from one environment to the other environment. So that will have an impact on the duration of the activities and various project dimensions, which could be from the customer's point of view, it could be from the scope point of view, or it could be other angles of the project or dimensions of the projects that we talk about. So these things needs to be taken into consideration, especially with respect to coming up with the project schedule. Now, talking about the various processes on the schedule part of the project, let's just first understand the various processes that are involved as a part of the schedule management. It starts with planning, and that's how typically it happens. If you pick up any knowledge area, one of the important things that we should be doing is the planning. And once we have a plan in place, that will make it that much easier for us to then just stick to the plan or just refer to the plan and execute the schedule management activities. So once we have a plan in place, we try to understand what activities are involved into this project. So whichever the project that you are working on, it could be research and development project, it could be an IT product development project, or it could be any manufacturing project that you're working on. So what are some of the activities that are involved into the project? So you come up with a list of those activities. Once we have a list of activities, we need to understand the sequencing of those activities. And this is where we take into consideration the dependencies. What is the dependency of one activity over other? And for that, at times we need to factor in various assumptions. And all that needs to be also documented. So hence, the next process is sequence activities, followed with which, once we have a list of activities, once we know the sequencing of the activities, then we can certainly come up with the duration that is required to complete that activity. So if it is requirement gathering as a phase within the IT project, and we have activity of conducting the requirement gathering workshop. So once we know the sequencing of this activity, then we can certainly be able to estimate the duration that is required to perform the requirement of gathering workshop. So that's how typically it happens. And then once we put together all the activities and we estimate activity duration of each of the activities that we have listed down, we just put it together and we can just roll it up or we can just total it up in order to come up with the project schedule. Once we have a schedule in place, it's important for us then to continuously monitor and control that schedule. So it's a very, very logical sequence of the schedule management processes. We start with planning and we end with controlling the plan, controlling the schedule that we come up with. Now, what we'll do is we will understand these processes bit in more detail. Now, we have a training program on PMP. That's where we discuss all these processes in depth, and we spend hours together on just understanding the schedule management activities. So, as I said, this is one of the important knowledge areas, and definitely this knowledge area consumes good amount of time within the PMP training program as well. So on this webinar, we may not be able to achieve or cover these topics with the same depth of knowledge, but we will certainly be able to cover in terms of width and what all is there at a high level from the basic fundamentals perspective. So starting with the planning part, whenever we come up with the planning aspect of the schedule management, the way this whole thing is organized, I'm sure by now some of you may be knowing that we have certain inputs that we consider. For each of the processes that we work on, there are always certain inputs that we consider. And then there are certain tools and techniques that we need to use. And what we get by the end of the process is some output. So we have also organized these slides in the similar manner. So for each of these processes, we will be understanding what are some of the key inputs for the process, what are some of the tools and techniques that we can use in order to effectively work on that process, and what we can expect by the end of that process. So let's just get started with the first process within the schedule management, which is plan schedule management. So starting with the planning aspect, just understanding the background of this process. So this is the process where we will be coming up with the plan for schedule management. So what all activities we should be performing as a part of the schedule management is what is documented here. What are the procedures with respect to those activities? What policies we should be adhering to? What kind of a schedule model, for example, we should be following? What kind of a estimation technique we should be following? So all those things needs to be certainly captured as a part of this plan. So we will definitely be able to do the effective planning. We'll be able to develop, manage, execute, and control the project schedule if all those things are documented effectively. Like, for example, what is going to be my approach when it comes to the sequencing of activities, right? So I can document that approach. What is going to be the estimation technique that I should be using? Is it the PERT technique that I'll be using? Or is it the bottom up estimation that I'll be using? Or should we be using on the project estimation, the analogous estimation? Or should we be using the expert judgment, etc.? So collectively as a team, we actually agree to that and we document it, we put it together in the plan. Now, this also gives guidance. This also gives direction on the project. While working throughout the project, we need to refer to the plan wherever we are stuck, or if in case the project manager is not available, if team wants to refer to the plan and get going, I think this is the document that we can look forward to. So plan is very important. Now, to starting with the inputs for each of these processes, as I mentioned, let's understand for planning part, what kind of input that we can look forward to. Certainly, when we do the project management as a part of the scheduling part, it's important for us to know the scope. Now, we are coming up with the schedule. Remember that we are working on the project and we're coming up with the project schedule. Now, in order to do that, we need to know the list of activities. We need to know the sequencing of the activities. We need to estimate those activities. Now, for that, we need to obviously know what is the project scope and any other information which you might get from the various documents on the project. Could be the project charter is one of the important input that we can refer to. That will also give us an idea about some of the key milestones. Suppose, when am I supposed to be completing the requirement specification document? When am I supposed to be completing the high level design or the low level design or the build activities? What is the date by which when I should be taking up the UAT sign off or the business acceptance testing or user acceptance testing sign off, etc. So those are some of the key milestones on the project that I should be aware about, which will come from the project charter. Now, apart from that, there are also a few more things that we need to be aware about while working on the scheduling aspect of the project. So before I move ahead, I can see here question, and this question is from Rajat, and he's trying to understand about the various factors which will affect the plan. All right, that's great. Thank you for that question, and this is a good question, definitely. As I mentioned when we started with this session, some of the factors that we mentioned, what will affect the deriving of the schedule of the project? So when we talk about the planning part, these are some of the factors which are going to really affect, which are your input factors. If you talk about the overall schedule of the project, as I mentioned, the resource availability will affect, the motivation of the resources will affect, the kind of technology that you're using will also affect, the dimensions of the projects that I mentioned, like scope of the project, the time, the budget, the risks, etc. So those things will also affect. So these factors will certainly have an impact on deriving the overall schedule of the project. So I hope that answers your question. Right. Thanks for the confirmation. So coming back to now the planning part of the schedule management, the other area of the input that we talk about is enterprise environmental factors. So there are certain factors as an organization, there are certain internal and external factors which will have an impact. One of the example could be the cultural aspects of the organization. How is the overall culture and the structure of the organization? Is it too hierarchical structure? How is the general culture? Is it too inclusive or is it too much process oriented? Is it autocratic? So what kind of leadership style generally it is followed? So some of these aspects will also have an impact. Resource availability, what kind of a project management software are you using? There are various examples of the PM softwares. Some of you may be already using softwares like, maybe there are softwares from the Microsoft. So MS Project could be one of the example, or there is Primavera, or Clarity is there from CA. So there are various such softwares which are there for managing the project, for managing the schedule. So which one are you using? Or the commercial aspects that are published on the project. So some of these things will have an impact as well as inputs to the planning part. Apart from that, there is something called as OPAs, which is nothing but organizational process assets. Now you will find the enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets will have an impact or will be the input factors in many processes, almost in all the processes. So if you talk about OPS will give us a lot of data about the historical information about the projects. So very, very useful, especially if you are implementing the techniques like analogous estimation, historical estimation, or parametric estimation. This data will be very, very useful to refer to. Or if you want to refer to the plan, what kind of a template are we going to use for a schedule management plan? So that template will come from the OPAs. So these are some of the inputs that we can look forward to. What kind of a tools and techniques can we use on this? Expert judgment. So we can engage people who have got previous experience of doing the schedule management and take their inputs. We can analyze the data. We can analyze the data, and this data could be basically the alternative analysis. So for example, make or buy decisions. So if we have the problem statement, if you have the context of the project, then obviously the kind of solution that is being agreed, that will also have an impact on the planning that you're doing for the schedule management. So we have to analyze the data, or reserves analysis could be one example. So management reserves, how would those be put into the plan? Or for that matter, certain buffers that we come up with. So how do we go about doing or putting that while working on the plan? So we have to analyze the data, and that actually helps. Meetings could be very simple yet very, very important tool that we use on the project. And meetings, we need to know when to conduct the meetings, whom to invite for the meetings, and how we can engage all the stakeholders effectively in order to come up with the plan for doing the schedule management. Now, what do we get at the end of this process is obviously we'll get the schedule management plan. So schedule management plan will essentially have some of the important aspects like the schedule model. What is my project schedule model? So as I mentioned, the project schedule model is nothing but my project schedule with some of the key dates, some of the key milestones, some of the key activities included into that. Level of accuracy, what kind of level of accuracy should I consider? So is it like, and that's something which needs to be agreed by everybody, all the stakeholders. So when I'm doing the estimation, would it be okay with the 10% plus or minus as far as the estimation of the activity duration is concerned? Or should it be 20%? Or should it be just 5%? So depending on the project, depending on the stakeholder agreement, you come up with the level of accuracy that's required. Unit of measurement, what are we doing in the estimation? Is it in hours? Is it in person days? What is that unit that you're going to use? Control threshold. So as I said, that when we come up with the estimation, so we need to know that how much should be the threshold, how much should be the upper limit or the lower limit which we can still withstand, with which we can still live with, in the variations. So we should be knowing that. Like in level of accuracy, we used to say, what is the confidence level with which we are planning this activity? Similarly, control threshold will have the positive and negative in terms of plus or minus control threshold for the schedule of the project. So it could be maybe plus 10 and the minus 10% schedule variations are allowed, okay, or it's fine to basically something which everybody is agreed that control threshold of 5% plus or minus or 10% plus or minus is something that could be absorbed. Then the project schedule model maintenance. So this is where we talk about the monitoring part of it. So how we can monitor the schedule, how we can come up with the variances and monitor it effectively. And organizational procedures links. So that will come from your OPS, and that will be a part of OPS later as well. Rules of performance measurements. How are we going to do the performance measurement on the project? How are we going to, from where this data will come? Release and iteration length. So if you are working in small iterations, so we can also agree upon whether iteration should be 3 weeks or 4 weeks, or what should be the duration. Reporting formats. If you are using any tool, so should it be automated or how it should be. So that talks about the planning aspect of the project. So that is the first process. Now we're moving to the next process, which is about defining activities. So once we have the plan in place, how are we going to approach the schedule management and what's my plan for doing that? Then I can get started with the first activity, which is my defining activities. So that's another important process that we need to work upon. So this is the process where we come up with the various activities by referring to the scope of the project. So once I have a scope in place, obviously what I would be doing is referring to the scope. I will come up with some of the key deliverables of the project. I will break them down into the smaller work packages, and those will be then broken further down into the activities. Then each of these activities can be then estimated. So if it is the requirements, then requirements will be broken down into the various smaller activities. So I can certainly be able to share with you a very quick example which will help us in relating it better as well. So as you can see on the screen here, so if it is a project management as one of the phase that we are working on, so we could be performing various activities. It could be identifying the focus group targets, or perform the focus group meetings, or conduct surveys. So these are some of the activities that we have agreed upon. So I have a work package by the name project requirements. Now project requirement is further broken into various activities. This is what essentially this talks about, defining activities. So one of the things that we use here, the technique that we use here, is a decomposition. We decompose these work packages into these smaller activities, which will then help us in estimating better. Now, what input can we use in terms of defining activities? First is, of course, we refer to the project management plan in order to understand the approach that we are going to use on defining activities. We will also be able to refer to some of the internal and external factors, like if there is some commercial information available which is published, and I can refer to that information in order to come up with the estimation. So that could be one factor. It could be the PMIS, which is Project Management Information System. So it could be MS Projects, or it could be Primavera, or it could be Clarity, whichever the tool that you are using. Under OPS, I can refer to some of the processes, how we can do the activity decomposition, for example, or how I can refer to some of the past knowledge on this project. So there could be the knowledge repositories which I can refer to, which will give me some insights into doing the activity definitions, as well as some planning, informal planning activities could also be scheduled. So that's the input. What kind of tools and techniques I can think of when I define the activities? I can certainly take opinions of the experts who can give us idea about how we should be breaking down these work packages into activities, how I can define the work packages, etc. Decomposition is a technique which I told you about. So I can break down this work package into the various activities. So requirement is broken down into various activities, as I took this example. Similarly, we can also use a technique called as rolling wave planning. Now, rolling wave planning and something called as a progressive elaboration goes hand in hand. So as we go ahead working on the project, things starts unfolding, and we keep on getting more and more information about the phases, about the milestones, about the requirements, scope, etc. So rolling wave plan is nothing but like whatever the information that I have today, based on that I do a bit of a detailed planning for next 1 month or 2 months. And the information that I may not be having in detail, maybe after 2 months or after 3 months or for next 3 months, I would do the high level planning. So the detailed planning for 1 month or 2 months, or maybe a 3 months, okay, or could be just for 15 days. and then high level planning for rest of the time period. So that's nothing but my rolling wave planning. So that's another technique which we can use. Meetings, again, something which is very useful always. What do we expect by the end of defining activities process? The first thing is, of course, we will come up with a list of activities like the one that I showed you. So if I have a requirement as a work package, then I can break down that into various activities. What I would get by the end of this process is the list of activities. The another thing is activity attributes. Every activity will have its own attributes. So for example, if it is identify focus group targets is an activity, then I would need to put some attributes around this. It could be assumptions for this activity, start date, end date, dependencies, succeeding, preceding activity, etc. So those things will be a part of the attributes of the activities. And those attributes will certainly help us in estimating the duration as well as we go ahead. Milestone list. For each of these projects, we'll have key milestones. Like by the end of the project requirement phase, what I will get is project requirement finalized or signed off or requirement specification document. So that's my milestone. So when I prepare this document, that is going to be my milestone. So I need to know the list of milestones, the change request. So since I'm referring to the scope, I'm decomposing the scope. I'm getting into the scope in a very detailed manner. So that means while interacting with the stakeholders and the customers, I would also be able to sometimes get the change requests, whatever is missing to be added. So that might come as a change request, which we need to deal with. Project management plan will also get updated with respect to if there is anything that needs to be changed. If there is any specific learning, we just go back and update the plan as well. So that's the defining activity. So just to quickly summarize, we started with the project schedule management as one of the important knowledge areas. So I told you that schedule management starts with planning the schedule management for the project. Once we have a plan in place, that's where we define the approach of doing the schedule management. Then we come up with the list of activities as a part of the define activity process. So once we have a list of activities, then the next logical thing will be sequencing them. And that is what is done as a part of sequence activities process. So let's get into the sequence activity process quickly. So in this process, as the name says, this process is all about just putting together the activities and just sequencing them. So we need to understand the dependencies and relation between the activities. So sometimes, as I mentioned, we need to factor in the constraints around activities. We need to factor in the assumptions. So all of that will be a part of your sequencing activities. Now, while doing this, while sequencing the activities, what should I refer to as an input? The first thing, of course, the plan. So that will give me the approach about how am I going to sequence the activities. So that's why plan is important. We also need to refer to the scope baseline, obviously, because ultimately these activities are broken down based on the kind of scope that we are working on. Project documents like activity attributes. So when I'm sequencing the activities, I need to understand the various aspects about the activity. So those are nothing but the attributes. So I need to know the assumption for each of the activity. I need to know the complexity of each of the activity. Okay, I need to know the preceding and the succeeding activity. I need to know the other aspects related to that activity so that I can sequence them as well. So activity list obviously is important. Assumption log, as I mentioned, around the activities and the milestone so that I can sequence the activity accordingly to achieve that milestone. Under EEF or enterprise environmental factors, we can also use PMIS tools, as I mentioned, like Clarity or Workbench could be another one for, again, sequencing the activities. Scheduling tool could be used specifically. There are certain scheduling tools like Workbench could be one of the example, and organizational work authorization system. So that will give you an idea about who is going to work on what. So that's another area which we can explore. Under OPS, we can refer to some of the templates for sequencing activities if they're already defined. And we can also get access to various project files, which will give you a lot of inputs while working through this. And what kind of tools and techniques can we use while sequencing activities? The most important one here is precedence diagramming method. So as a part of precedence diagramming method, we should be able to put these activities into sequence by using the activity on node or activity on arrow kind of methods. And I can just quickly show you how the precedence diagramming method looks like, just for you to get an idea. So as you can see here, the precedence diagramming method, this is where we basically put the activities on node and we just sequence them and we put it in a diagrammatic manner so that we would know how the activity flows one by one, and the overall flow of the activities, the flow of the work. And at the same time, that actually helps us in understanding dependencies and sequencing them better. Dependency determination, so that's another important aspect. And leads and lags. So leads and lags are nothing but, if I'm saying that I have got a lead over the activity, that means I can actually start that activity by 3 days or 2 days early. But sometimes there are lags, so that means I have to wait for that activity to start. So for activity to start, so if you take a very quick example of, let's say, painting a house. So when you paint the house, you need to first remove the flakes of the old paint, and unless that is removed, you can't really start the painting activity. So can I say that in order to remove those flakes, I would need 3 days? So I can't start the painting activity. At least we need to wait for 3 days there. So there is a lag for painting, which is a succeeding activity. In order to start that succeeding activity, I need to wait for at least 3 days. So that is my lag. And sometimes there are activities which we can start in parallel as well. So one of the quick example could be, you're working on a high level design and the low level design. So you have a high level design in hand, but I'm sure you can also start working on the low level design. So that means you have got a lead, and you can actually start 3 days early or 2 days early. So those things also actually helps later on when we decide about fast tracking and crashing of the project. And I'm going to talk about that as we proceed. What do we get by the end of it? Obviously, we should be getting the list of activities which are sequenced. So project schedule network diagram is what we should be getting. And as a result of any changes, or as a result of any new learning, even we update the project documents. So that's what we can certainly expect. So I'm just going to show you very quickly the project network diagram, so that you'll get a fair idea about how the network diagram looks like. And yeah, in fact, this could be one of the example of the way a network diagram is drawn. So you will get it from the tool itself these days, because there are effective tools which can give you the network diagram, which will then help us in calculating the critical path, etc. So that was about sequencing part of the activities, which we can do by using the PDM or precedence diagram method. So that is something which is a very, very useful method. All right, so moving to the next process, which talks about estimate activity duration. So when we estimate the activity duration, now we have a list of activities. We have also sequenced those activities and created the network diagram. That's where we are. And now we have to estimate the activity duration. So this is where essentially we come up with the time period required for each of the activities. So if I have this list of activities, then I can easily come up with the time period that is required for conducting surveys or for preparing the market research findings. I would need maybe 12 hours, or for consolidate analyze data, I would need maybe 18 hours. So I would be able to come up with the estimation for each of these activities in whatever the unit that's agreed, and that's basically agreed and put and captured in the plan. And therefore, as a part of the inputs, one of the things that is required is the project management plan, which will give us an idea about schedule management plan. So there is a question here before I proceed, and this question is from Sheetal, and she is asking that why project management plan is mentioned over here and why not the schedule management plan only. Okay, that's a good question, and I have seen that some people have a bit of a confusion sometimes around this. So one thing that we need to understand, when we say the project management plan, it comprises of all the other subsidiary management plans. And those subsidiary management plans could be the schedule management plan, scope management plan, risk management plan, okay, resource management plan. So all these plans put together becomes your project management plan. So when I say project management plan, it will definitely comprises of the schedule management plan as well. So that's the point over here. So we would need to refer to the project management plan, which will essentially give us an access to the schedule management plan as well. So I hope that gives you an idea about why usually you find that as one of the inputs. Okay, thank you for the confirmation. Moving to the next part, which is another input, is of course some of the documents which we need to refer to, like activity attributes, because when I'm doing the estimation, I need to refer to the characteristics, the attributes of the activities, list of activities, any assumption around the activity will help, any past lessons will help while estimating the duration. Of course, the list of milestones which will help us, right? So if I know this particular milestone has to be completed by this particular date, and I need to then find out whether I can fit that into the schedule or not. Project team who will be actually doing the estimation as well. And apart from that, under the enterprise environmental factors, I'm just going to give you some of the examples. Could be productivity metric, which we can certainly refer to. Productivity metric will help us in coming up with the estimation for the activities. So if I know that the market research data analysis previously took us maybe 18 hours, now on this project also it could took 18 hours at least, right? So that kind of a productivity analysis or the productivity metric actually helps us in understanding the productivity of the employees or the team members, and that will certainly give us input while doing the estimation. Another thing could be the location of the team members. So it could also have an impact. The location of the team members, the time zone differences would also be having an impact. Under OPS, project calendar needs to be referred to. Scheduling methodologies, we also need to refer to what is the scheduling methodology that we're going to use really. And there are various methodologies that we're going to touch upon very soon. So that time you will be able to cover those. In terms of technique, tools and technique for doing the estimation. One of the important tool is of course expert judgment, which is very, very simple yet very powerful tool that we can use. Another is analogous estimation. This is where we compare it with the previous project and we estimate the ongoing project. Parametric estimation is based on the various parameters of the project. And a very quick example of the parametric estimation, if we have to take, like let's say you're working on a software project and there are certain parameters that we can think of. One of the things could be database connections or input validations. So if I know that input validation is a medium complex task, and for that usually it takes 1 hour if it is medium complex. So if I have three such a tasks to perform, I can easily say that that will take 3 hours. So based on these parameters, I can actually come up with the estimation. 3-point estimation is also called as the program evaluation and review technique, or PERT. So this is where we factor in the most likely, pessimistic, and the optimistic estimation. So all these three estimations are put together and the activity duration is derived out of that. And then of course the meetings, that's where we engage all the stakeholders. Data analysis also helps us, the previous data analysis, or for that matter even factoring in various constraints of the project and analyzing the data. So those things also really gives us an idea about the various aspect of the scheduling. Decision making techniques. So there are various options that are explored when we are doing the scheduling. We can actually think of the various decisions. So make or buy decision could be one such example. So if I have to buy this solution as it is, how long would it take? And if I have to build this completely, how long would it take? So make and buy decision. Bottom up estimation is what we have been talking about here. When we decompose the work package into smaller activities and we estimate each of the activity, we just totally tough from the bottom up, and then we derive the project schedule. Now, what do we expect by the end of the activity duration? So obviously we should be expecting the duration estimates for each of these activities, rolled it up at a project level, we get a duration of the project. Basis of estimates. So why are we estimating what we are estimating? So what is the basics of the estimation? So we can certainly document as much as possible. When am I saying that the data analysis of the market research would take 18 hours? So why is it so? What is the basis for that? So maybe I have factored some resources with some skills. Maybe I've assumed probably that all the data is available and there is no dependency on anybody. So what are those assumptions? What are those considerations for estimating? So that's my basis of estimation. Then in almost all the processes, you'll find project documents getting updated based on the new information or based on the changes that you might be receiving as a part of the project. So just to connect you back, what all we covered so far? So we started with the schedule management plan. We created a plan. Then we started with coming up with the list of activities. Then we sequenced those activities. We created the network diagram, etc. And then we started estimating the activity duration for each of these activities. So once we do that, then obviously we can come up with the schedule. So let's understand how to come up with schedule as a part of the develop schedule process. So this is where we actually derive the project schedule based on whatever the work that we have done so far, and by referring to the schedule model as well. What kind of input can we think of? The first thing is, of course, the plan, because plan always gives us the approach for each of these processes. What is the approach that's decided on the given project? And that's why we need to keep referring to the plan. And since we are deriving the schedule, we need to refer to the scope baseline as well. The other documents, the project documents like the attributes of the activity, assumption log, milestone list, etc. So those documents will be very useful here. Agreements. Now, we are talking about developing a schedule. So if you are engaging any third party, we have certain agreements with them. So we need to also take them into consideration so that we'll factor in those contractual commitments while developing the schedule. Now, let's move on to the other factors like enterprise environmental factors. So we also need to refer to some of the communication channels or scheduling tools which will actually help us in doing these things maybe in a bit professional way, bit swiftly as well. So I did mention some of the examples of the scheduling tools as well. Communication channels. So for example, if you are engaging the third party vendors, if you are engaging the various stakeholders, how are you going to communicate to them? What is the communication channel which is agreed upon? So that's another thing. Also the scheduling methodology, some of them which we already covered. What kind of tools and techniques can we use while developing schedule? The first is of course the network analysis. So we do the schedule network analysis. I also showed you the network diagram. So once we do the network analysis, we actually come up with the schedule. That's the minimum time that is required to complete this project. What are some of the critical tasks that needs to be performed? And that's also a part of your critical path method. So critical path method, as I mentioned to you, that if the network diagram is created, the critical path is nothing but the path of the activities which we need to complete one by one, where there is no float. So you will not get any extra time to perform those activities. So all those activities needs to be performed based on the estimated time that you have estimated for those activities. So that is also the minimum time that is required for you to complete the project. So that's your critical path. There could be more than one critical path, and it's important for us to know those critical paths on the project. Data analysis. So again, we did speak about data analysis as a technique. Resource optimization. So how I can utilize the resources effectively in order to be productive on the project. The another technique could be PMIS, use of the project management information systems if you're not using it already. Leads and lags I did mention about, and schedule compression. At times, we might need to use the schedule compression techniques like fast tracking and crashing. So fast tracking is a technique where we actually start working on the activities in parallel. So if you are a bit of behind the schedule and you want to fast track, what you do is that you identify the activities which you can start working in parallel. So you do that. Crashing, on the other hand, puts more people on the activities. Crashing might increase the risk on the project. So we need to monitor it very, very closely. But those are some of the schedule compression activities which we discuss in detail in the PMP training program. Agile release plan. So if you are working in an agile way, we can also come up with a release plan. It could be quarterly release or a monthly release, or you may even deploy it or release it in production by the end of every sprint, depending on your technical readiness, depending on your technical excellence, as well as the kind of team members that you have on the project. Now, what do we expect by the end of developed schedule? Obviously, we should be expecting the project schedule. So let's take a quick look at what do we expect. The first thing is going to be schedule baseline. So we come up with the project schedule. This project would need maybe 6 months to complete, or 1 year to complete, or whatever the schedule that you have come up with, and whatever the unit that you have agreed in which you have to present. The other thing is the schedule data. So you have a data of the milestones, you have a basis of estimation, you have the sequencing of activities. So all this is nothing but your scheduling data that you have. The project calendar. So you would know the key milestones and the key dates to be referred to track. Project management plan updates on a regular basis with any change requests. If with any new learning, we need to do that. Yeah. So we just spoke about the change requests as well. So once we have the project schedule in place now, it's very important for us to control that. And this is what is covered as part of the control schedule as a process. So control schedule talks about, now since we have the list of activities, we have sequenced them. We also came up with the duration for each of these activities. We have also come up with the resources that are going to work on those activities. We also factored in various things like schedule constraints. We have done the analysis, etc., of those things. And we come up with even the schedule model, which is giving us an idea about various important dates and the key milestones as well. So how we can control that? So in order to control the project schedule, it's important for us to first refer to some of the things like the project schedule management plan itself, as well as the scope baseline. The another thing that we need to refer to is the list of project documents. So what are some of those documents? So it could be the activity list, it could be assumption log, it could be milestone list. So some of these documents will be very important for us to refer to. Another area is the OPA. So OPA will give you an idea about monitoring and reporting methods. So what are those monitoring and reporting methods? Are you going to do the any statistical analysis or quantitative analysis of the data, or is it going to be just a qualitative analysis by taking the feedback? The formal and informal ways of doing the controlling as well. So that could be another quick example. Work performance data is very important because once you start performing or working on those activities, then you need to come up with the data which will give you an idea about what was planned and what is achieved. So that's planned versus actual data is nothing but your work performance data. What kind of tools and techniques can we use? Data analysis, which we did discuss. Critical path method, which we did cover as well. PMIS, which is project management information system, which will give you some of the ready-made matrices in order to monitor the schedule effectively. Resource optimization for ensuring that the schedule is managed effectively. Schedule compression. So again, schedule compression, we've covered a bit on that as well. And lead and lags. So again, lead and lags we can certainly factor in. And what we get by the end of the control schedule activity is the work performance information, which is nothing but what was my planned schedule, what is my actual schedule, which will help me in deriving whether I am ahead of the schedule, whether I am behind the schedule of the project, or how am I performing. Schedule forecast. So based on the trend, then I can actually forecast whether would we be able to complete this project within the given schedule, or would we go ahead of the schedule, or would we go behind the schedule. What would be the case? So we can forecast it for next 6 months or 3 months or whatever the time period that you have to forecast. Change requests. So how we can factor in those change requests, maybe as a part of the change request management process. Project management plan will also get updated as a result of that, and certain documents like assumption log, the lessons learned, etc. will also get updated. So this brings us end to this webinar. Just to summarize what all we covered so far as part of this webinar, we started with the most important part, which is understanding the project schedule management. And as I mentioned, it's one of the important knowledge areas within the 10 knowledge areas that we have. And then we understood a bit about the schedule management, the context about it, why is it important, and what are some of the factors which we need to take into consideration while deriving the project schedule. We have also gone through some of the important processes as a part of the project schedule management, like coming up with the plan for the schedule. So schedule management plan, then identifying the activities, sequencing those activities, then we estimate those activities in terms of the schedule, whatever the duration that is required, and then we come up with the schedule, which is you're developing the schedule, and then we control it. So those are some of the key processes that we have covered. And for each of these processes, we have also gone through the inputs, tools and techniques, and the output. So all this put together, I'm sure must have given you a fair idea about what is done typically as a part of the schedule management activities within the project. Now, this information that we covered today is not only useful from the PMP exam point of view, but also some of these things we can also apply it on our projects once we go back. So for more detail and for in-depth session, I would encourage you all to please enroll for the PMP certification examination. Thank you for attending this session, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!